All right, we're going to toss it back to you, Travis. One of the steps we wanted to start with is just to get our name out there and get that solidified. And I think Travis wanted to talk a little bit about what we might want to call ourselves moving forward.
Yeah, I think now that we've got a chance for us to meet a little bit, and we've got a little bit of a steam going with us, it's time to name our team. Every good team needs a name to it. And so I believe we'd like to, and definitely open for feedback, but kind of call this steering committee our Buffalo County Collaborative. So just as we go forward kind of with naming rights, I think that's how we'll refer to ourselves, unless anyone feels differently or has a different name for us.
And we did set up a poll question. So Matt, if you want to start that up, we can run a poll question quick. I think it says yes, no to the name, or undecided. And so if you guys want to vote on that, if you like that, undecided, I think means you'd like to continue to think of a different name, and we're okay with that. Matt, do you have the same controls I do?
I should, yeah.
Okay, so you're seeing the poll live as well. Okay.
Travis?
Yes.
Can I throw a thought out there as far as the name goes? That I have no objection to Buffalo County Collaborative Steering Committee, except it doesn't really tell us why we exist. So if we could get health or well-being or something among those words that would at least, connect us to particular kinds of work.
Yep, we can definitely take that into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Any other feedback before we close out the poll, or maybe it is closed out at this point?
Yeah, I think we can go ahead and close it now if you want to, Matt, so they can see the results. And Diane, great comment. And we sure are not held by this by any reason for the long term. We can come back and revisit this at the next meeting too, and see if there's some additional language we want to add to it. We just thought to get some consistency with naming to get us going so that we're all using the same language to start with would be a good place to get started. But again, we can alter that based on your feedback at any time.
Andy, I like your comment there, Buffalo County Wellbeing Collaborative. That could definitely be something that we take a look at too. We'll take it back and talk about it over this next month here, and then moving forward, we'll come back and let you guys know kind of what we landed on there. But appreciate everyone taking the poll and giving the feedback so far this morning. Regardless of what we call ourselves, we're going to be doing great work. I'm excited about it. Okay, Denise, I think that was my 5 minutes in the spotlight here today. I'll kick it back over to you.
Yes, thank you, Travis. So what I wanted to do is just give us a quick rundown of the things that we have already looked at. Pretty much most of last year, this were the successes that we accomplished. We decided on the collective impact model as a team. We forwarded and approved moving forward with the results-based accountability model. We also have looked at the health and wellness indicators that I think I see Judy Sickler on this group. She was one of the original steering committee members pre-pandemic that worked through those health and wellness indicators. So we have those in front of us. And then we have our vision statements, which is the lens in which to look at the gaps in our community. And then we also have the community gaps that we've looked at. So I'm going to just go through that briefly in the PowerPoint just to kind of bring an awareness of the language connected to the work, and just take, I think, about 10 minutes here and go through that. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and share a different screen. And this is the PowerPoint that you would have received in your packet as well. My computer's a little slow. Okay. So today's purpose of the meeting, I guess we didn't really cover that, but really to name and claim your work, refresh our knowledge in the work that we've done today, and then determine our next steps for the collaborative and our individual roles. So here's our collective impact model, right? We're all working towards that collective impact where we see a common agenda and where the data and activities are mutually reinforcing. So we're working towards that collective impact. We are adopting the results-based accountability model. And again, compliments to the amazing work that has happened in our community so far, counting how much we do, the number of people we've served, and the services and activities that we have provided to the community. Such amazing success when we count the numbers of things that we've done. 1 million meals delivered during the pandemic was a great example of that. How well did we do it? The percent of services and activities performed well. We've done some pretty amazing work in that area as well to address the activities and really evaluate how well we've done as a community. And now we're pushing into this new phase of, is anyone better off? So we're beginning to ask that question. Of those 1 million food boxes that we delivered, how many people are now food secure, right? It's beginning to dig a little bit deeper. How many of those people are currently employed? How many of those received services for mental health supports? How many of them needed childcare and were able to find the childcare services in the community? So we're beginning to ask a few more of those types of questions based on the numbers and the percent of what we've done well. So our results-based accountability model. Here's the data. I think this is going to look a little bit familiar to all of you. I did kind of cut the document down a little bit just so we focus mainly on the data. But when we look at the area of behavioral health, we're looking at data that we've collected on suicide, depression, anxiety, mental wellness, and substance abuse to really wrap up that category. And this is the intended impact that we want to make in those categories. So this is our behavioral health data that we brought to the table. I should say too, if anybody wants all of the data sets that are aligned with this, just message Matt and he can send you the full document because we do have that and we're working on getting that up on the website as well. Here's the second category that we've named early childhood and adolescence. And in this area is school safety, bullying, overall abuse, any types of abuse, maybe I should say, support, which comes into protective factors, the 40 developmental assets, the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, trauma, the trauma-informed care, mental health, coping skills for youth and children, early childhood, quality childcare, social emotional skills, and then social media addictions or how we use social media. So that wraps up the early childhood and adolescence category of data. Moving into access to basic services, this is the area that we looked at graduation levels, unemployment labor force, overall mental health care access, physical health care access to insurance, to primary care. Emergency room visits was something that popped up. That's something that we need to add to this list. Affordable housing, housing problems that are facing our community, and then food insecurity. So that wraps up access to basic services. Our final category is that of vulnerable persons. And so that focuses on our diverse population, the minority population in our community, or those who are just vulnerable. This, I think, could also include vulnerable adults, vulnerable youth, those who are deemed interested in services, receiving services in our community. Poverty is an indicator in this area. We also did a slight adjustment. We moved our physical health and chronic disease in this area to really focus in data in these areas towards those who are most vulnerable. So this we might be able to identify specific populations who are most vulnerable to chronic disease or healthy lifestyles. So that's the data that we've been looking at and had in front of us for quite some time. Our overall goal is to advance innovative solutions to complex social problems. And in addition to that, here are our vision statements that we worked on all last year. I'm just putting that back in front of you again. These are the pieces in which I keep thinking of as a lens. We look through these topics as a lens to examine the data and the gaps and barriers that we have in our community. So do all people have resources that are easy to understand and accessible for all? If we look through that lens to the data on vulnerable persons, we would then be able to come up with those gaps, right? Which you did. And so here's the gaps. Resources are not easily understood or accessible. Residents look for resources when in crisis and most often ask a trusted friend and adult. We've spent a lot of time on each of these categories, and I think Nadia and I presented these at least 5 or 6 times, I would think, but they're all here in front of you. I also want to do a shout out to Abby Olson. After the last meeting, she kind of digested everything we talked about and kicked back to me what she heard. And Abby, I would say almost every one of those gaps you identified aligned back into these gaps that were identified last year. So here's our access gaps, our coordinated service gaps, and then value all people gaps that were identified. So the lived experience of parents was not heard from those voices of parents. So those are our gaps. So that's a quick refresher. We now have the collective impact model. We have results-based accountability. We have, trying to get back to your agenda here. You have community health and wellness indicators. You have vision statements, and you've identified gaps or barriers in the community. And I'm just going to say, congratulations to all of you. This is a lot of hard work. And I would say this has been a 2-year in process conversation. So I just wanted to take time, label the work, show you the work so that we're starting to build that common language of this is what the collective impact model is. These are the gaps that have been identified. So any feedback or comments as to the refreshing our knowledge of the work that we completed in 2020 and 2021? Okay, not hearing any comments. Hopefully there was no surprises in that refresher. All of those documents have been sent to you. Michelle Tucan is not on this call. I think she's sliding right now at Lake Placid. She does that in the morning. So she wasn't able to join us through this session. But after this, we'll start working on a web page to line all these pieces up so that you can access them at any time and share them with others. So you can start using that same terminology and be able to share the pieces with others in the community. The next, I'm just going to hand it off to Nadia. We have some pieces that we want to share, but I think she just kind of wants to bring a message from the board of directors before we start this process, and then I can come back to talk about structure. Does that sound okay, Nadia?
That sounds good. Okay, so our task today is really to determine a structure to help launch this work into the community. And we're relying on all of your expertise and experience to help direct this work. So the board, as you've heard already multiple times, did spend the majority of last year gathering information and discerning next steps in our vision process. So that they are now asking you as the steering committee members to be holders of this information. And they're asking to hand the work off to you. They have entrusted you with carrying this work forward because they believe that the community has proven itself to best address these issues together. So we do want to take a moment to recognize and appreciate, as Denise said, the great work that has been done. And our community has really tackled some big issues together. But even prior to this past year, and prior to the start of the pandemic in 2019, the board recognized the complexity and the sheer number of tables that staff was stretched across, and really took a step back to consider the best use of community partners' resources. So as you are aware, the issues that we are facing today are more complex. We are now, we have pandemic, post-pandemic, still in pandemic, not sure what to call it. issues that are complex. And so as the staff and the coalitions began to address some of these issues, they saw common themes. Coalitions shared that they were working on issues that crossed between coalitions and considered what the benefit would be of coming together. And so those gaps that were identified crossed those coalition lines, and we asked how we could make more of an impact by working together. So in order for our former structure really to evolve to better address these issues, we need innovative ideas from you. And the Buffalo County Community Partners Board of Directors is looking to you to bless this process moving forward.
Thank you, Nadia. So one of the things that the Buffalo County Community Partners Board did early on in this process, I think in 2020, I believe it was around March or April, is they voted that they would be the steering committee for this collaborative work. They intended to meet as a retreat a couple of weeks ago and hand that baton off to your group, but due to illnesses, we weren't able to have a retreat. So we're gonna move forward in that direction because we know the board wants this group to have that leadership role, and they want to take their step back into being that true backbone organization. So they're handing the baton off to this group, and so this is kind of a layout of what this work could look like. I'm just proposing a recommendation, but please don't take these recommendations as things that you need to do. They're just thoughts that we've had. Things that we've heard from other communities. A lot of this is out of PowerPoints that Joanna has shared with us over time. And just Nadia and I were laughing. This next slide I'm going to show you was a PowerPoint slide that Joanna gave us in January 20th of 2020. And Nadia and I looked at it, we're like, that's not us. We don't fit this model. And it's interesting now, 2 years later, we're like, okay, this is the model we want to create. And that just shows you the conversations and the talking through these pieces just to try to figure out what is it that we're trying to build and how could this really make an impact in the community. So without further ado, I'm going to share with you this slide that I was mentioning, if I can find it here. And it is in your packet. So you can kind of take a look at that in your packet as well. I'm actually going to share a different picture because I can get it bigger on a different screen.
And I was just going to say that really it's been a process to get to this point. So I understand that in all of our past meetings, we've thrown a lot of information at you. So I guess we understand that it takes time to walk through these steps. So we're not expecting anything grand.
Yeah, it could be that all of you are the same as Nadia and I were 2 years ago and said this doesn't fit us, and we're okay with that is what we want to say. So this is one of 3 samples that Joanna and other coaches across Nebraska shared with us a couple years ago when looking at building a collaborative. So when I look at this, if I could kind of put some labels to this that help you identify possible connections to the current work. The backbone coordinator would be Buffalo County Community Partners. We also are currently serving as that fiscal agent, right? But that's a conversation at some point in time if we want to have a separate fiscal agent from the backbone. That's always an opportunity. For us, it's not a requirement for the collaborative, but it is something that could be considered. So that is the structure that's already been established. Now, the leadership team, we would like to replace that name with the Buffalo County Collaborative Steering Committee or the Buffalo County Wellness Collaborative Steering Committee. So that leadership team would be the people who have been invited to this monthly meeting. When you look at that big blue oval, that could be the full collaborative, right? That's the 100-some people that logged on to a Zoom call in November and said, yes, we love what you're bringing together. We love the collective impact model. We support the results-based accountability. We reviewed the vision. We reviewed the gaps. We had a little bit additional information to add to those gaps that was incorporated into the conversations. And we kind of stopped at that point for the end of the year and plan to bring that full collaborative back together next Wednesday. So that would be the full collaborative. Right now we have, I think, 98 people who were on the last call in November. So there's a fairly sizable group of people, and most of those are those people that are on the call today. So then the next question would become, how do we start to break out this group, right? And so we do have some premise ideas that we want to pass by you as far as what those work groups could be within the collaborative. If we were to wave our magic wand and begin to build work groups, would we begin to build them around those data sets and the health and wellness indicators? So would we have a behavioral health group? Would we have a vulnerable adults group? Would we have an access group? And would we have an adolescence and early childhood group? Those have been questions we've been asking ourselves the last few months, and we don't have the answer, but we sure want to talk with you guys to see what your recommendation is, because these are the pieces we want to hand to you, support you, but also just throw some thoughts out there to see what you guys feel is best and most important as a steering committee to move this work forward. So without further ado, we're going to, I don't know why I keep using that language, to move to the next part. We want to do 2 breakouts. The first breakout, we really want to look at this sample structure. Do we like this sample structure? What's missing? What do we like about it? Those are the couple of questions that we want to ask going into this first breakout. We're going to do a random breakout. We're going to go into 3 breakout groups. Nadia is going to facilitate one. Travis, are you up to facilitating one, or do you need to get going in the next 15?
I am good for now for this one.
Okay, so Travis will facilitate one, Nadia facilitate one, I will facilitate one, and Joanna, I believe you're going to want to float between all of the 3 groups, right? When we reach the breakout groups, you guys are all going to be randomly assigned to a breakout group. Matt's going to take care of that on his end. We'd like you to ask 2 questions, and maybe somebody could type those questions into the chat for us. What do we like about this model? What's missing from this model? So 2 questions to ask and talk about over the next 15 minutes. And then we'll come back. Each 3 of the 3 groups will report out. So we'll need to make sure that we assign somebody that reporting process when we come back to the full group. And I'm sorry, let's meet for 10, report out for 5. So it's a total 15-minute turnaround process. Breakout 10, report back for 5 minutes, and then we'll go into the next breakout. Any questions on the process? All right, our hope is when we come out of this is that we have some decisions made, or at least a blessing of some type of structure that you want to move forward with as a steering committee. And this is our best example to put in front of you for consideration. All right, we'll adjourn to breakout groups. Thank you, Matt.
All right, everybody, here we go. It might pop up with the thing, saying accept the room, or it might just send you, but either way, when I close it, I'll give you a buffer of like a minute if you're thing out, if you point. And I'm not sure if you heard that because my internet connection is unstable. So here we go.
I'm here.
All right. Do you want to facilitate us out of this? How are you comfortable with that?
Sure. We were just having a very good conversation. So I think I'd go back to each one of you to just think for a minute about what came out of your conversations that we want to lift up right now in terms of changes. So I'm going to jump to my group first, just because we had a really good conversation and I don't want them to forget what they just learned. So Travis, do you want to give us a quick update to what we liked and what we thought could be enhanced with the current model?
Yeah, what we liked about it is just the structure that it brings. It provides, by naming some of these things and putting it out there, it creates some role clarity as to who is doing what and how everything kind of intertwines with each other there. So that's a piece that we really appreciated. we talked a little bit and started getting more into the weeds as far as what's missing about just some of the relationships back and forth and how we're tying together, for example, planning and measurement and the work that they're doing and what the role of the Buffalo County board itself does versus the leadership team and some of those types of things, just how that information flows back and forth. So that would be a piece where, as we take a look at, or our group kind of talked a little bit, where you've got this generic model here that maybe for us, we would go through and maybe kind of fill it out a little bit more with some of our needs and kind of customize it to us a little bit. Team, what am I missing from kind of the gist of our discussion there? Okay.
I think you got it. And Kathy was saying that as we look at some of the very specific priority areas we've identified under each of our focus areas, we'd want to be clear about, does this one go to basic needs? Does this go to early childhood? Where do things fit? Transportation, for example, so that we would want to take those center circles and really fill that out with a little bit more detail so that we could, zoom in on each one and see what fills underneath it. Great. Thank you, Travis. Nadia, what did your team add?
All right, so our team also talked a little bit about that role clarity, and the one thing that they mentioned was it does give the ability for people to really focus on, if they're in the work group, to focus on the work that they have been assigned. It's less overwhelming and relieves pressure on individuals who are involved when they are reassured that there is someone else who is overlooking, there is someone else who is making those connections, that they don't have to be the expert in every area. So as far as that, clarifying those roles and knowing that structure is in place. Also the recommendation that there is a leader from each work, or a person from each work group who is assigned to the leadership team to help to be a liaison and transfer that information back and forth. Also that they liked that community partners was both the backbone and the fiscal agent. So to leave that as is. And then there was some reference to, if any of you are involved with HC3 in Hall County, some similarities maybe between the way they're doing things and some benefits in that work that they're participating with there. So I think that's all. Did I miss anything, team?
Great, thank you. I would just add, Travis, one of the things we talked about in our team was that maybe that box that says fiscal agent right now, we would combine that backbone coordinator / fiscal agent as one role and use that box for planning and measurement. So that might be a way to make that a little bit more clear in the graphic. Denise, what did your team add that we haven't heard yet?
Yeah, I'm actually going to hand it off to Krista Fritzen to talk about what we liked about it and followed up with, I think, Abby Olson on some of the concerns and challenges.
Okay, Krista, take it away.
I think fairly consistent with what's been shared to this point is we saw it as very clear, concise, easy to understand, and visibly easy for others to understand potentially, so easy to share with those who haven't been intimately involved. And then also needing to further define some of the things that were talked about previously, the roles specifically of the leadership and Buffalo County community partners.
Good.
Mm-hmm. And then in regards to some recommendations, one of the things we were wondering about is in the full collaborative circle, if there should actually be arrows between all of the subgroups, the working groups, for the purpose of making sure that we are communicating with each other to try to decrease any duplication of tasks and use of resources in, too much, but to really show that the collaboration and communication. We also felt like we need to add structure to the subgroup specifically, which some of you have mentioned. One of our goals would be that with each subgroup, there would actually be positions that people offer to be in, like a co-leadership role. So that way we can decrease the amount of work that's on the shoulders of the staff at Buffalo Community Partners and make it more community partnership engagement. So for instance, the basic needs, there would be 2 co-leads and then somebody responsible for communicating back with everyone. And that way it might also kind of help support when people aren't able to be at certain meetings. We can keep the work going, and also kind of decrease the amount of overload on many people's shoulders.
Nice idea. I like that. These are all great. Thank you, Krista. Thank you, Abby. So I think this is the value of just taking a few minutes at the front end. It feels like, oh, we like this model, let's go with it. But we get these subtle enhancements to a model that's going to make it feel like it actually is yours. It's worth this time and investment. And it makes it really clear and easy for you to be able to go out and explain it. When you're going to have to explain to others, what are you doing in this work? You can talk a little bit about the relationships, the roles, the responsibilities of the various groups. Nice. Yeah, the only other thing that you'll, when you get into some of those small groups, you'll get more structure because you'll think about setting meetings times, standard sort of who needs to be at the table. Is there sort of a core group of folks that make up the basic needs group, for example? What agencies need your voice, those kinds of things. But this is very good. Okay, Denise, do you want to move us to the next piece?
I sure do. I do have.
This is Kathy.
Ahead,
I just
Kathy.
do have
Kathy
a
has
question.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, I just want to know. Okay, so we need to figure out a way, or need to make clear that these work groups are different than the coalitions that are already established by Buffalo County Community Partners, or are they the same, or are those coalitions in these work groups? I think that could get really messy.
Great question. I know Denise has been doing some thinking about that. So let me send it back to Denise for a minute.
I want to add to that question before you answer it, because would they replace those groups? And then also, I think that we're going to have a lot of overlap in agencies among the different groups that we established. So do they replace the coalitions, but also how are we going to handle that overlap? Send a separate person to the different, I don't know. Anyway.
All really good questions. So we are going to take note of those, because we know through this entire process that we don't always know the answers, right? The staff had a brief moment, like about 10 minutes this morning, to kind of digest this and talk about this. So I'll share a little brushstroke of kind of what we were thinking. But again, it doesn't have to be the end all be all. What our initial thoughts were as these groups form, and let's say we have a behavioral health group that's coming together, we would want to ensure that those who have been working in the area of behavioral health, so a suicide prevention coalition, our positive pressure members, those that we would see in alignment, are in that first meeting to be able to talk about what their work is about and what their hopes are to achieve in the community, because that needs to be part of that conversation of the overall group. So those coalitions would weave into those bigger conversations. And I really think at that point, it's really up to that group then to decide what that formation and that continuation of that conversation would be. It's possible that they would come back to Positive Pressure Coalition and say, since you're doing such good work in there, would you continue to do that, right? However, maybe you would look at doing something a little bit different based on the information we have. And I think Michelle Warren had a really good observation in talking about Martha and the work that you've seen already. And could you talk a little bit to that pin top? And I think you nailed it. And I think that's really important for us to hear.
Well, it was okay. So I had raised my hand for something different too, but just the example you just gave about mental health, and you specified a couple of coalitions that have been dealing with mental health. Yet mental health has been one of the sort of repeated themes that's come up, for example, with Martha's group, right, with the multicultural. But my comment, I think Abby kind of touched on it earlier when we were talking about the flow chart of, starting out here with the groups, identifying problems and streamlining it down to where it ends up on the heads of the backbone coordinator, which in this case is BCCP. And I called it like the pinhead, like they're taking this much weight and this much work, and it's all falling down to this much space. So it's going to stretch people a lot at that, not the bottom, basically at the backbone coordination spot. Is that what you wanted me to say, Denise?
Yeah, because I think you had some really good examples about how you've seen those conversations in your diversity group, and that leadership and that next step doesn't always happen because it all kind of falls back on Martha's desk, right? To the coalition. So we talked a little bit about how important it would be for all of those members who are coming together around that conversation to lift that work, that it wouldn't all just land on Martha's. We kept using the word pinhead, and it just gives you a visual.
That sounds awful.
coming to a point. And then Martha's trying to figure out what to do next. And I don't think you want that type of structure. I think you want all the community partners taking pieces and parts of that and coming back together to talk about what their next steps are.
It needs to become very specific though, as far as like, I keep using the word, the locus, like where is that need located? Because we talk in very general terms in the Multicultural Coalition about, there's a need for, Maria Barrocio has seen X, Y, and Z. And I don't know, Becky at the healthcare clinic before when Becky was there, would see these needs, but there's never, we have to be very specific if we're going to be filing those needs down to one particular responsible partner or backbone, because we can't just go back out and say, well, here's a response if we don't know to whom we're responding. These are details, I guess. I don't know. And I'm not a very big detail person, so go figure.
Joanna, do you have anything else you want to share or any expertise? I will say the next portion of this, we are going to outline some roles and responsibilities and then kind of talk a little bit more about your roles and responsibilities as a steering committee, just to kind of take one more step into this, knowing that we don't know all the answers today, right? But we're just going to throw some ideas out there and see kind of what we really like and want to stick. So Joanna, anything else you want to add?
Well, only thing I would add is that, first of all, this is going to take some time, right? You're not going to get to this place in a month. This is going to be a year-long process, first of all, is my guess, just to kind of sort through, what groups are effectively working in the community right now. And like you said, they should keep going because they're having strong impact. But if you start to use the model, for example, that Diane and team have been talking about in terms of results-based accountability, you might find that while people are very, very busy and they're doing a lot of perhaps very good things, the impact might not be measurable in the way that you might define a strategy and then shared measurements. So, and I've used this example over and over, and you probably are all tired of hearing it, but when I was doing funding at United Way, we shifted to this model of results-based accountability, and we started looking at the difference between counting things. And for many years, we were just so happy to see programs that say, we've expanded our numbers in our program by X percentage. We're serving more people. We're serving more people. But when we stopped and said, how effective are you? And how well are you serving those people? The questions started to be a little different, and the answers came back different as well. So I take the example of a jobs program. Every year over year, they told us more people were going through the jobs program. But when I started to ask, how well are you doing that? Are you using the latest technology? Are you training people in certain methodologies? How are you training them for these jobs? And then most importantly, is anybody better off? Like, how many people got jobs? And beyond, did they get a job? How many people kept a job for 3, 6, 12 months? Changed the game completely in terms of what we funded, because we were no longer interested in funding a number of people who went through a program. We were interested in funding impact. So while you have coalitions that are doing a lot of work, we'll have to ask some difficult questions going forward about the impact of those various coalitions, and where there's demonstrated impact that you all feel is remarkable and really moving the community forward, you wouldn't want to change that. But where you might see that over time, some of the impact has dwindled, then you may have a conversation with those groups within these larger kind of coalition subgroups the small group work that you're doing about, does it make sense for us to merge those groups or change those groups or refocus? And that would be a conversation you would have with the leadership of those coalitions. So like I said, this won't happen in the next 2 weeks. This is going to have to be thoughtful, measured step-by-step kind of processes, because you don't want to set the world on fire that's been working, right? But you do want to be inquisitive and inquire with your coalitions, are they on task in terms of bringing the right folks to the table? Do they have the input of, voices from people with lived experience? All of those things that are going to make this even better. What you're trying to do is go from very good to great. Right? Think about those examples from good to great. So it's not saying that what we're doing in the community hasn't been impactful and hasn't been helpful and hasn't been successful. It's saying, how do we keep evolving that work that we're doing in these various areas? And so you'll have to, at some point, probably pause and celebrate the good work of many of these groups and then move it to the next level. And so it won't be easy. That's why this leadership team's been assembled, because you're perceived as leaders who can, be comfortable with those perhaps challenging conversations going forward. But I would encourage you to see this as an exciting time going forward, that you're going to engage people in thoughtful dialogue about what's needed for the community. But it will take time. You know, it won't happen. So it won't happen overnight. And I think you have a really good track record as an organization leading those kinds of massive change efforts across the community. I think your history will serve you well in terms of building trust and building a solid foundation for this conversation. So I know it won't be simple, but I don't think it'll be, you know, difficult either, in the sense that you're going to create chaos. I think you'll do it thoughtfully. That's probably more than you wanted me to say, Denise, but that's just my gut on this.
That is fine. We're winging it today, right?
A little bit.
So what I like to build in is just decision points. So I do have another survey question for you. And that survey question is, do we move forward with this model? Yes, no, or undecided. So if you need more time to think about it, or you want to explore other models, undecided would be the right vote for you. If you like this and it seems to fit, or you're willing to explore the model further, you guys are the steering committee, right? If you need to adjust the model at some point in time, you have the ability to do that. So yes, no, or undecided, we'll give you a minute to vote.
If we're considering, like, with some adaptations, would we be yes or undecided?
I think with some minor adjustments, I think yes is just fine, because you're going to have time to continue to keep fleshing that out. It's not like this is the final model, right? You're just voting yes, this is a good premise to start from.
Thanks.
And you guys reviewed several models, right? This is just the one you're proposing? Okay. So you've done some of the homework for us.
I will mention the other models that we looked at, and I can show you those models. Actually, why don't I email them out to you after this meeting, just for you to get a chance to look at them. The work groups were separate from the collaborative. And I like this one, and I think we keep coming back to this one because the work is within the collaborative. But I can sure send those out afterwards, so you can kind of take a minute to digest that. And we'll come back to this, right? Like Joanna says, this is a process. We just need to make some decision points along the way to kind of ground our thinking, and then we can keep adjusting and refining as we move forward. All right, do we have all the votes in, Matt? I think so. So I'm going to end and share. So I will send out the other examples for you just to look at and consider, but we do have some pretty good support of moving forward with this premise, right? This maybe recommendation for us to continue to work toward. Good job, guys. Okay, did I shut it off, or are you still seeing it? Did you see it? I'm so confused. I can't get out of this. Stop sharing.
We did see it, and now it's not up anymore. Denise, you're good.
Okay, good. It was still on my screen and I was confused. Easily happening today. All right, for your agenda, the next step, because we're on our last hour, right? I do want to shuffle a little bit because I do feel like we have some synergy around roles and responsibilities. So I'm going to jump to that piece first, because I was going to start asking what the names of these groups should be, but I have a sense that work's going to take us a little bit longer. And I think that's something I'll table, and we can come back to that. But I do think this conversation about what our roles are and what the role of this committee should be our next conversation. And if we have time, we can come back to just kind of talk about the work group titles, but let's spend some time in the roles. So one of the things we were thinking about as a staff, so let's just kind of travel this path for just a moment if it were to all work in this way. So if we had, let's say, the 4 work groups in the area of behavioral health access, children and adolescents, vulnerable adults, we had leadership in those groups moving forward, having conversations, the data that they all held and the topics that they held were defined. And there was communication happening amongst those work groups. One of the steps that we thought as a staff team is, as those groups first get together, so in those first meetings of those work groups, we would begin to ask the questions of, what do you hope to achieve? So let's say you're a community partner and you are coming to the conversation around access. We would begin to ask you, as that partner, what do you hope to achieve? What are your program outcomes you hope to achieve in the area of access? That would be like the first question we'd want to start having that dialogue in that work group. And then who needs to hear what you want to achieve? So who else needs to be a part of that conversation to hear about what your outcomes are? And then how does the end user inform your work, or how does that person with lived experience inform that work? So those are the three questions we were considering would be kind of the central focus point of those first meetings of those work groups within the large collaborative. So those are just a few things that we've been thinking about. Again, not in stone, but just processing what this work might look like. Along with that, we're trying to figure out what the role of the steering committee could be in leading that work group, right? So are there some roles that you as steering committee members would like to lead in moving those questions forward, or those conversations forward, and helping that group gain that structure, right? So we began talking about a leadership role, a recorder role, somebody who has kind of a strategy role, being a visionary, and just hosting that work were some of the roles that we started to talk about. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen, go back to our PowerPoint. So this information was pulled directly out of, are you seeing a PowerPoint that says role of the steering committee? I forget when I get in here that I can't see all of you. So this information was pulled directly from the structure piece that you just reviewed, that Joanna and her team.
I'm not seeing a shared screen, Denise.
Okay. Try this one more time. How about now?
Yep, you're good now.
Okay, now you're all on it. That makes sense. So these are the roles and responsibilities that Joanna's team has researched and has shared with a lot of the communities across Nebraska. So the role of the steering committee could be to provide leadership and guidance to the collaborative, promote the mission, garner full support of the collaborative, champion the effort, provide oversight and guidance, make data-informed decisions, utilize big picture thinking, align partners and share knowledge, and develop sustainability. So that was taken right out of the Collective Impact Handbook of the role of a steering committee. That is in your agenda packet too, so you can take that home and process that a little bit to make sure that's what you're agreeing to do by serving on this group. These are the proposed work groups. Again, we're not going to finalize this at this time, but I think it just helps us to kind of put that thinking in our minds to be able to kind of process the next questions. So we're not making that decision today. However, when we start to talk about steering committee leadership, and we look at a collaborative leader who would lead this work group, let's say around behavioral health, we would be looking to leaders who are patient, they're good listeners, they invite input, they can see cross-functional connections, they're accessible. That was a piece that I saw in a lot of the collective impact work, that those leaders are accessible so they can respond to others and they're easily accessible. They communicate clearly and they ask a lot of open-ended questions. So that would be a collaborative leader of one of those work groups, potentially. A recorder could record main themes, summarize, communicate, reflect, follow up, store, and retain that knowledge, right? So somebody who can hear the themes that are coming together, be able to communicate that, synthesize that, and be able to help communicate that. A strategist, I thought empathetic was really an interesting piece that kept showing up in the strategy part of this. So they're empathetic, cross-functional connector, data-driven, and communication, coaching, and education is really key in that strategy role. And then a hosting role would be inviting others, providing space for the conversation, have good people skills, and very positive. So I thought our next breakout would just be about these roles. How do you see these roles? Who serves in these roles, right? Is it members of the steering committee, or are you people who go out and find others to serve in these roles? Are these the right roles for what we want to see happen? So the questions as you go into this next breakout, and again, this information should be in your packet I sent to you in advance if you want to pull it up on your own computer so you have it there with you. Who leads the formation of these work groups? And when I say who, it's the skills. You know, what's the role that you're looking for? It's not necessarily the name of the person, but what role? And is it a member of the steering committee, or are you out finding people to serve in those roles? So is it the steering committee that serves in these roles, or are you going to find people who serve in these roles? And then what did we miss? The last question, what are we missing? So if somebody, I can type into the chat because those were confusing. Who leads this work? What are those roles and responsibilities to lead this work? Is it you, the steering committee members, or are you finding people to do it? Do we have all the roles? Anything missing from the conversation?
I just went ahead and typed that in there, Denise.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And Joanna, since this is kind of the first time you're seeing this too, anything else you want to share before we step into those breakout groups? Looks like she maybe had to step away.
Sorry, I'm here. I just was opening the packet and I couldn't get back. I had too many things on my screen. I'm having one of those morning folks. No, you know, the only other thing I was thinking about is that sometimes in a group like this, it's helpful to name someone in each meeting to be the process observer. It's kind of a weird term to just say, you know what, I've noticed that in this conversation, we haven't heard yet from Jessica, or Judy, you seem to have a question. You know, somebody who's just not leading the conversation, but is sort of watching the group and make sure. And so that might be the role that one of the other folks play, but it could be the strategist or the host, but sort of actively thinking that as you bring these kinds of community teams together, you want to make sure you're encouraging full engagement. So a process observer can also just at the end of a meeting say, you know, here's what I noticed, here's what worked well today in our communication, here's where we got a little off. That's the person who has the authority of the rest of the group to say, we aren't going to be very effective if we keep starting at, you know, 15 minutes late, folks, we need to get here on time. So you kind of authorize somebody to hold the bounded space in the room when a group like this gets together, and then that person invites sort of improvements as they see them or enhancements to bring the process along. So that would be the only thing I'd add to this.
Any clarifying questions on the content that we're going to discuss in the breakout rooms? It looks like Travis he said he had an emergency meeting he had to get to. It is the time in the day, right, during COVID. So he needed to step out, but he does bless all the work that we're doing. So I think, Joanna, are you willing to serve as that third facilitator for us? Okay. I believe we'll be randomly selected again, Matt, is that right? We'll go into breakouts. Let's give us 10 minutes again. Does that sound okay? And then we'll come back and our report's out. Let's give ourselves 10 minutes to report out. How does that sound?
Denise, did you see Michelle's questions in the chat?
No, sorry, I've got too many screens going as well.
No, I just typed the questions that we're supposed to ask ourselves in the groups. Thanks,
yes.
I was just copying them down so everybody had them in front of them while we met.
Yes, thank you.
Are we addressing the work in just the steering group, or are we also addressing the roles in the roles in the steering group, or also the roles in the work group?
When it comes to the steering group, you're asking yourself, are we the ones that fill these roles, or are we the ones that go find people to fill these roles?
Okay.
Kind of getting a sense of what role we want to play on the steering committee. So who leads the formation of these groups? Is it the steering committee, right? Starting to define our roles and responsibility. Are we the ones that start these groups up? Or are we looking for others? And then we gave you a list of all the roles that could possibly be played in this work, what might be missing. And it looks like process observer is one piece we want to make sure and add into that. Clear as mud. We're going to break out for 10 minutes, come back and report for 10 minutes. I do know a few of you are kind of jumping in and out. This is being recorded, so we will send the recording out to you so that you will be able to catch back up with us. All right, Matt, you can work your magic, sir.
All right, folks, same situation as before. I'll pull you back in after 10 minutes. And yeah, like Denise said, should all be more or less random, but everybody knows everybody, so you might see somebody that you know, and that's all right. But here.
What a dynamic conversation. I was in mid thought when I got moved to the group. I think we hit on a lot of questions. So Joanna, we didn't come up with solutions, but I'll tell you, we thought about what's got to change in order to, if we move in a different direction.
Why don't you just go with that, Denise, and give us the feedback from your group?
Okay. I'm going to lean on, is Judy Sickler still with us? I'm trying to think.
She just had to jump, it looks like.
I'm trying to process everything I heard.
Do you want a minute?
What I heard was, we're not ready to make the decision of this role and responsibilities that I laid out for us to talk about. The conversation evolved more about coalitions versus the collaboratives, how the coalitions fit into this work. Are we duplicating work with coalitions and collaboratives? The role of the staff. I used an example from planning and measurement. We were just kind of talking through that the Tobacco-Free Coalition is wanting to do, or has an 18-month plan where they would work into the schools for wellness policies. We have probably 5 other coalition work plans that have that exact language, go to the schools to take care of this type of piece in the schools. Kathy Gifford went, whoa, schools are tired. We're overwhelmed. We can't do anything. When are we going to stop talking about we need to do this to schools to figure out some other way to do this, right? So that then become the conversation of, we need these big groups, right? We need these big groups so Kathy doesn't have to go to 5 different coalitions in the community to say schools are overwhelmed. So until we get to that big conversation where Kathy and every other school representative can say, we need a different model because bringing all this to the schools is not working right now. We need to figure out another way to impact students and education.
And I just want to throw in there, it's not that schools don't want to participate in these things. I want to make that clear. It's just that there are certain requirements that they have to fulfill, and they're down to counting minutes for certain things. It's not like they don't think these are important at all. It's just they have limits too. So just, yeah.
Yeah, and I see Cheyenne on the call too. So that I improvised Cheyenne. She's with the Buffalo County Tobacco-Free Coalition, but I'm using that as an example. I could have picked on positive pressure. They have that in the work plan. So does the Healthy Minds to get MTSS into schools. Every one of our coalitions has a strategy of what they would like to get into the schools. I think if Nikki Gosman was on this call, she would also say healthy relationships piece connecting to the schools. So if you keep thinking about that, how do we move that up into a bigger conversation? And those would be those conversations of those work groups to say, what can we do to do some preventive work in conjunction, in partnership with our school partners? So Joanna, there was my debrief. Did I miss anything that we talked about in this group?
It sounds like a good conversation, a little bit different conversation from what you anticipated, but still a really important piece. And I think that will be the beauty of this. New questions are going to keep arising. So we're going to have to be flexible to accommodate that.
One
I do
more,
think that's just a big piece we've had all along. Like, what do you do with the coalitions that are in place as you start moving this model? So it'll have to be thought through. Kathy,
I'd like to
what were you
make
gonna
one
add?
more comment, and
Yeah.
then I'll be quiet. It's like, I think it's important that these groups who have great need for well-being in our state, in our communities, I'm 100% sure that they really know what's already being done in some schools. So maybe, I don't know what that process would be. There would be some method of auditing what is already being done, because it might surprise people to know that in many schools, things are already being done that address the very thing that they want to do. And then, you know, it's not like, okay, we're going to come in and do this program, or we're going to go in and do this program, or whatever. So auditing what's already being done and giving credibility to what's already being done is huge.
Yeah, that's a nice addition, Kathy. Some kind of an asset map in those areas needs to be developed, right? So you can see the gaps. Very good. Nadia, do you want to talk about your team's feedback?
Well, along with the conversation that we've been having, the one thing that our group talked about was really that the voice of the coalition, those coalition representatives leading that formation. So bringing the information that they have established with the history of that coalition to lead that formation, having a representative on the steering committee from that coalition. So really, as far as the formation and the identifications of roles and responsibilities, falling first on those coalitions. But then the other conversation that we got into was, where does community partners staff fall in all of this? What is their function? So that was a conversation that we had. The one concern was, you know, if that staff person isn't facilitating and isn't taking minutes, then it might not be getting done. So identification of some of those duties. But Tana used some examples from the community wellbeing, different methods that are already being implemented. And what she talked about was really having a staff person like Wanda have a co-leader, someone who can help to facilitate, really did change the dynamics of the group, allowed you to have a better vision for that group. So I think that's something that we will need to talk about, is how does this all play out then with the staff's functions?
Great points. Very good. Okay, and let me go back to my team. Anybody want to volunteer some thoughts from our team?
Well, I sure can.
Thanks,
I have
Abby.
a hard time sitting quiet. Sorry.
That's
okay.
Great.
So one of the first questions that we asked was, really, what would be the size of the group that we're looking at? Because that makes a difference on the style of the group sometimes. So I think we kind of settled as a group that a steering committee member should likely be the one to help form the group and get it off and running due to our vision and the why, but that we could really benefit from sharing that leadership with others in the community that are not on the steering committee. We feel like it would be beneficial for us to invite others into this space because of their lived experiences and their direct work that they're doing, because that could bring a whole different focus. So really kind of centering around the theme of being more inclusive and also adaptable to meet the needs of our groups. Josh mentioned that, you know, for many of the groups, we do need to have student and youth voices, but oftentimes they're not able to be at the table unless it's like on a Sunday afternoon. So we may need to get more creative and get away from the traditional view of meetings and meet them where they're at, whether that's the elderly at church or the senior center or something. And kind of saying that in a way to challenge the group to think a little differently, since we all kind of have our own focuses. there anything else, group?
I think that's great, Abby. The only other thing I saw we talked a little bit about is how do we make sure that we have people who are close to the work involved in the leadership role?
Correct.
Right. So people who are really on the ground doing this difficult work, how their voices are really heard in there. And then I want to acknowledge that we've got a couple of comments in the chat. Krista, can you share with us what you were thinking about in terms of the resource role of the coalitions?
I was thinking the bottom line is mostly communicating, creating a menu of what we have and what resources each of those coalitions have, and then communicating better to those people who might use them. So rather than each group or one group going to the school and say, hey, we can do this, we within behavioral health, we have a menu of items that we offer and the resources and the people that can offer those. And then we do a better job also then of communicating with all the schools of what those resources are and the availability of those. And we already have them established, and kind of our people, our committee members are those that may go be part of doing that, because the committee members will be, those subgroup members will be those people that often either provide the services or access them to then follow up to get those predetermined services to, say, the schools or to whether the Carney Kiwanis or the populations that need them, basically.
Yeah, good, very good.
I think you've done a good job at communicating and letting people know what services are available. Along with us communicating with each other, I don't think we market it or get it out to the community well enough at this point.
Yeah, and that's going to be the challenge that I think that's kind of an underlying theme, is that what we know as a leadership team is different than what's more commonly known, and vice versa. Our experiences will not match those of people who are on the ground. So this is good. Abby just reminds us, and I think it's good, that when we think about representatives from school districts, we've got to move beyond just the KPS. We got to be thinking about the differences in rural communities, which I think is really important. And then Matt, I was trying to read your longer post here, and I just want to make sure we get this. So I'm going to, I might turn this back to Denise to look at, but I'm thinking that the problem that we're coming together to sort are all the things that we've talked about over the last year, right? As we've identified in those focus areas, and there's a lot more detail behind this top level. We've broken this down into, 4 focus areas, but behind that, there's a lot of information in terms of the problem. And I think we're all in agreement that it's going to require cross-sector collaboration and support in terms of resources. And I agree with you that this approach could help resolve a lot of social challenges in the community, because what you're going to find out, it's almost a false dichotomy to say, we're going to have this group working on this and this group working on this and this group working on this, because it's a system that you're trying to address, right? And so it doesn't matter where you begin, you're going to end up talking about these other pieces, which you know this from your previous work, right? It is all going to overlap. And so the idea then is to have a community of leaders thinking about the system. And before you would take action in any one of these areas, you would be asking yourselves, how will this impact our work in any of the other areas, right? So that you lift that conversation up before you take action. There's a lot of that ready, aim, fire. You are not firing until you're really ready, and the aim is much bigger than before. If that makes sense. Okay.
Joanne, I think the one piece that I didn't come back to, which was probably the most simplistic piece that come out of our conversation, I think it was Dr. Duffin who said this. It should be a given. I think that's kind of how she shared that we do have a role as a steering committee to start these groups, right? That there should be some connection between the steering group, the steering committee, and these groups. And that may be all the further we get today, right? It's just that understanding that in this most simplistic form is what we can agree to today, and then continue to have these kinds of dialogues to figure out how all these pieces plug and play together. I think Judy Sigler's comments were really well said. She goes, why are we changing something that's not broken? So I think there is that conversation that we need to keep having. It's not broken. What we're saying is the structure of community partners is not broken. But for us to evolve, to solve complex issues, we need to enhance the current model. And so there's some enhancing pieces that we want to add to this model. We just need to figure out within that enhancement how the coalitions that have been doing good work continue to do good work and gain from that enhancement.
Yeah. Again, good to great is what I think you're trying to move forward in terms of your thinking. I would just one other observation share with you that whether the leadership team is the host or the recorder, I think the other given is, I think about Diane's, thoughtful, it's a given that we're going to lead these teams, is it's a given you're going to be strategic. You're going to have to all be strategists in this role and think beyond what is currently available to what would be possible. And I think that strategy role is going to be really important as a leadership team. You can't be a leadership team if you're not strategic in this work, and envisioning what is it we're trying to accomplish. And you'll have to keep coming back to that, because there will be lots of places where people are going to say, we don't really need you to work with us. Thanks very much. We're doing fine. And that will be the biggest challenge is, not how do you break what's not broken, but how do you invite people to stand on the balcony with you long enough to see the possibilities of whether their work is coming at their work as a systems approach or not. Okay, great conversation today. Thank you, everybody.
Really good.
Denise, where do we go next?
Yeah, back to our agenda, I think. Nadia, did you have anything additional from the board perspective that you wanted to share? I'll try to get us back to the...
I don't think so, unless I shared it all earlier. I don't have anything additional, unless there's something specific you wanted me to.
No, I think you shared most of it earlier. It was that premise that the board is here to provide that backbone, but really looking to hand these responsibilities to the steering committee, and knowing that they're in partnership with this, right? And I think Dr. Schaefer said along the way that the board also has some work to do to figure out their roles and responsibilities as we move forward. I don't know if there's anything else to add from that perspective. I think just the question at this point is this the work you want to move forward, right? How are you feeling all? Is this work? It's so hard in a Zoom. Let me think about how to phrase these next questions. What would you like to see from the backbone organization to help move this work forward?
This is Abby. I'm kind of wondering, I'm probably the only one, but if we could get a current update, like through email, about all the coalitions that are out there right now, just to kind of wrap our heads around it. And as we look to what kind of groups we're going to form. Now, I only know of the ones that pertain to my world currently, so.
No, my concern is that we have paused some of the coalitions for months. And I'm concerned about the sustainability of that if we continue that pause for a long time. Will we ever be able to bring those coalitions back and have them as strong as they were, where we haven't met for literally months? Some of them, I'm thinking we're getting close to 6 months. And so I have a great concern about the sustainability of something that hasn't continued. I don't think we can pause those indefinitely and think they'll come back and have the structure that they had and the support that they had.
Excellent observations. I'm just pausing to see if there's other thoughts. What questions do you have that you'd like to continue to search for solutions? Or what can the staff team or the board help support as you consider moving this work forward? And Abby, we do have a document we put together that I will send out to the full team. I abbreviated it for this meeting, but this form goes on to say who's active in this work.
Okay.
Is a column and who we'd like to invite to this work. So I think that will become a nice document for all of you to have at hand so you could kind of see the themes related to who's doing the work. We'll have to put some thought as to what that work is, right? But that document exists, so we can get that out to the group.
The other thing that I was going to say, if there's a documentation of the crossover between representatives from coalitions and the steering committee.
That's a good question. Matt, could we visually show the membership of all the coalitions or the members in each of those coalitions and the crossover?
Yeah, we can see what we do.
I think we pull out that tool that Dr. Duffin brought to us a year ago. I think that would show it. We maybe could do that. It's possible.
So my question would be based on what Dr. Schaefer shared is it important to talk about why those groups had to be paused? And if that's going to continue to be a barrier for us moving forward, is it because of the current environment, overload for people, you know, what were the reasons and what are we up against, I guess?
Yes. And I think every coalition had different reasons. I will say on behalf of the executive director, I needed to be able to pull staff off day-to-day activities of the coalitions to move to the balcony.
Yep.
And so now it becomes a question of, is there time spent in the balcony continuing to move this on, or do they continue in the action side of things, right? Or do they have a foot in each space?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. Yeah.
As someone has been on multiple of the coalitions, the work is still being done. The work on the ground is still being done. And people, I mean, I still communicate with people that are on here and not on here about the work that we've done with suicide prevention, youth mental health. And so there's still a lot of momentum with work and creative ideas happening. It's just we're not meeting on a regular basis, probably to formally connect and create maybe the bigger picture. But I mean, I would still say there's lots of great work being done.
And there are some groups that just because of emergency supports that we said, yes, they need to continue to meet. So housing is meeting this afternoon at 2, because that's case managers coming together to say who has basic needs, who needs their utilities paid, and who needs housing support. So that work continues to meet and work through. All of Tana's work with early childhood, they continue to meet because there's a lot of momentum about a survey going out. I would say Healthy Minds and suicide prevention have been paused because both of those groups were at a space where they were working on what's the next thing that they want to work on, right? So we're like, well, should we start the next thing with them, or should we figure out how others could come together to help form what that next thing is? And then those groups could then carry that momentum forward, right? The YAB group, the Buffalo County Youth Advisory Board, is still meeting. Josh continues to have them meet. And positive pressure has been paused. That was one, but the work still continues. So prescription take back happened, right? Because the partners come together and those programs are still happening. Those coalition meetings just aren't occurring on a monthly basis.
Okay. We've paused too with the, I guess, the multicultural, what Martha's group was. We used to call it bilingual community connectors, but it's morphed a little bit into something a little bit different.
Am I right, Martha? Is Martha still here?
Yep, you're right, Michelle.
We're going to talk about strategy.
And that work still continues. So I think like Nadia and Martha, and I'm sorry, I know there's others that are probably on this call, had a great conversation at a Latino grocery store a couple of weeks ago to really lift up some issues in the community. So there's still that work going on. It's just not a formal monthly meeting of the coalition.
I would add to that that some of the work in the subgroups that we have, like the MyLink and the RADX app with Rusty with the NIH grant, we had a great community meeting last night with probably 30 migrant families to talk about, you know, what can we bring to your family during this time. Okay. All Spanish speakers, but unofficially outside of the group, right?
So Abby, that's kind of where my thinking is. Once we get these work groups going, we lift up that work that's been happening, right? That becomes a conversation. This is what our hopes are for the community, that these types of needs are being discussed in the community.
Thank you.
So I'm going to work on a couple wrap-up pieces. What I'm hearing from everyone is that you'd like to see a couple other models that we looked at just to make sure we landed on the right model. You'd want us to take a look at adding wellness or well-being to the name, just to show some effort around health or well-being, and for consideration for your next time you get together. A current update of who's involved in the work based on those themes. So you can kind of see who's out there and who we'd like to invite to the work. And that can be sent out to you for the next meeting. Some time and conversations about paused coalitions. Why are they paused? Reason for pausing, what work is continuing, just some way to process that. Some way to show the crossover of partners amongst all of the coalitions. So if we could show that Krista Fritzen attends 5 different behavioral health meetings to show that how many meetings she goes to get to the end product of that work. Just picking on Krista. I'm still kind of processing that the viewpoint that what we have is broken, and really trying to communicate that it's not a broken, it's adding and evolving, right? Evolving to something new, right? Not something new, evolving to something that can create greater impact.
You know, the other thing I'd like to see Denise bring back to the steering committee is kind of, we talked about it a little bit in our last breakout group, and Tana may have some other comments about where you see the role of the staff in the new model. And I think there were some very good points made, is that we had our staff doing everything before. I mean, I look at the coalitions, we didn't have a leader of the coalitions other than Tana or Martha. You know, you look at those and they were everything. We need to bring back what kind of model we would like our staff to have so that we can have some discussion about that, because I do see some very good things about some leadership, of having a leader of the group that's not a staff member, but also there's various functions that we need to make sure our staff do to make sure we continue to do things. So it's like the recorder. If we don't have minutes of the meetings, we have a hard time proving and remembering what we did. So I'd like that to come back to the steering committee about what those roles, changing roles are. And you know, I say our biggest role is facilitation. That's the biggest thing that Buffalo County has done over the years that I've been a part of it. So I just think that's important to bring up and discuss as we look at the new model.
Very well said, Dr. Schaefer. Thank you so much. And I do believe staff would accept that challenge and having some conversation additionally with the board.
Well, Denise, I think the other thing that's important about this and why I'm asking the questions is, you know, kind of how I look at when we're developing staff, that there's a lot of people in the community that have a voice. It's just maybe not known or not, you know, like they're just not invited to the table because it's always me instead of somebody in my staff. But we need to be able to grow as a community to let some of these other folks have a chance to get their feet wet, even if they might not be as experienced as many of the faces here, you know, because we have to be able to continue to sustain it as well. I mean, there's a lot of faces on here who have tons of experience, who have been great mentors as well. So I think if you could balance it somehow, you know, the process might take longer because the understanding and the learning's not there. But I think that would also help with decreasing burnout and having the same people doing the same work.
Thank you, Abby. We threw out there the next meeting to be the third Wednesday. We can continue from this 10:30 to 12:30 if that works for everyone. I just went a little bit longer because I just felt like we had some really good conversations we needed to have, and we've had them. We've had really good conversations today. We could do another longer meeting on February. Sorry, I don't have that in front of me. And then we also have the large coalition meeting next Wednesday. So I'll need to kind of process what I'm hearing from all of you and kind of decide what those next steps should be with the larger collaborative next Wednesday. And I think the one thing that I will say I've learned in this process is that you move fast to kind of get ahead of it and kind of think about things and to lay some framework. And then you back up and you start at the beginning again and bring more people into that conversation. So that'll be part of that conversation with the collaborative next week. So your next meeting as a steering committee will be February 16th at 10:30 to 12:30, something like that. We'll start working on the agenda and get that out to all of you. Joanna, any other thoughts, or Nadia?
No, it's been a great conversation. Thank you.
I have one final thought. I wonder if it would be helpful as we head into our next time together to do just a sort of casual poll about where the members of this group envision themselves falling as far as the subcommittees go. Just to kind of give us a, you know, an idea of where we think we would have our talents or our strengths best landed.
Great idea, Michelle. We had talked about that and also talked about staff alignment with those two, right? Yeah.
And that's what I was going to say also is great conversation. I think that we may want to kick some material out to this group prior to the meeting on the 26th with the full collaborative, just so that we have a little bit of direction with that group. But thank you for your time.
It might even make sense to think about those roles too and ask about the roles and how people envision themselves as having strengths in group work. But again, I don't need to like prolong anything here. And I've really appreciated being with all of you guys. It's a real honor.
Thank you so much, everyone. We'll work. I see, Krista, your concerns for time too. We can sure take a look at that and move it more over the lunch hour for people. That might be a little bit more convenient. So we'll take that into consideration as well. And if we're polling all of you, we could probably even check to see what the best meeting time is as well. So thank you. Wonderful dynamic conversation. It feels good just to talk with others about the things that the staff has been talking about for a long time now. So it's really good to hear your feedback. So thank you for that. Have a fantastic cold winter Wednesday, and please be healthy and take care of self and others. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.